but I've asked them, I've said, like, I'm sure you've heard about the eclipse. And like, kind of for most people, it's like in the back of their mind. I mean, it's crossing over their town.
It took your breath for a minute.
Yeah, I was like, and then I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And before I knew it was over, it was sad. This is crazy. This is so nuts.
I'm Leticia Ferrer.
And I'm Chris Alexander.
And this is Totality Talks, the Solar Eclipse podcast.
It just took my breath away, the whole thing. It's really cool that you can see the corona and you see the sun kind of spewing out from behind the moon. It literally took our breath away.
A lot of people said overrated, but that was like one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Not overrated.
Welcome back to Totality Talks. In this episode, we chat with the creator of the essential Solar Eclipse Timer app and author of the book Eclipse Day 2024 and More, expert eclipse enthusiast, eclipse photographer, and plastic surgeon, Dr. Gordon Telepun. His book Eclipse Day 2024 and More is the most complete resource out there for planning your approach to observing the April 8 event. I received my spiral-bound copy and I love it, and recommend you order one right now. It is available in electronic form, so you can access the info without any wait for delivery. Check the show notes that will be filled with links to access his collection of work. We dive right into our conversation with Dr. Gordon Telepun.
Now, Chris, were we together in 2019 in Argentina?
Indeed, we were.
Yeah.
We were on the same tour, like 2 or 13 or something, and you were right behind me with your family, with the sheets lined up and the sticks in the air, cameras facing backward. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I remember you. In fact, you and I have emailed or Facebook messaged throughout the years. And I told my wife today that I thought you were on our tour in Argentina. That was a great eclipse.
It's a fantastic trip and great eclipse. That low eclipse was just, it was magical. And I don't know. Yeah, it was an early one for me. I just thought that it looked a little bit bigger.
It's your second.
That was my second total.
Yeah.
That was your second one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 2017, I decided I will not miss as long as I can travel to the next one. But watching and meeting all the people was so fantastic. And I think we ended up skipping over to Santiago on that flight, 30-minute flight over the Andes.
Yeah.
And that was it was a great time. But the experiment was fascinating to watch. And I just love that you had your family involved in it and they all had their gear.
Oh, yeah. It was quite a production. It's hard to bring all that stuff internationally. I've got a mega setup for Texas. I'm just bringing a ton of stuff, a lot of partial phase phenomena experiments and just a bunch of stuff. It'll be fun.
So speaking of Texas, where are you going to see it?
We'll be in Burnett, outside of Burnett.
Okay. So Burnett.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Texas towns go, it's burn it.
Burn it, yeah.
Yeah, let's burn it. Yeah.
A lot of problems pronouncing Texas towns.
Yeah. Now, Leticia, you're from Texas, and Chris, where do you live right now?
I live in Austin, Texas. I was born and raised in San Angelo.
All right,
yeah,
so you're from Texas too. Okay, good.
Yeah. And where are you from, Gordon?
So I'm originally from New Jersey. I mean, that's kind of my home state. And then all my surgical training kind of kept on taking me south. So that's how I ended up in northern Alabama for my surgical practice.
Okay.
Well, first eclipse. I mean, how did you get hooked on this stuff?
So I've always been interested in astronomy and NASA. I followed the space program. I'm old enough that I can remember as a kid watching Gemini launches. And I remember the first Apollo 11 moonwalk. And I've always been into astronomy. And then as a kid, I was a little child. I must have been 8 or 9. I don't remember the year. We were at a summer vacation on the Jersey shore. I lived in New Jersey, and there was a total eclipse in Canada. So, of course, the path was in Canada, so it was partial in New Jersey. And I was little. I mean, I was 8 or 9. I don't remember the year, but I've looked it up. I know which one it was. But anyway, my dad knew about it. So he brought welder's glass on our summer vacation to the Jersey shore. And we watched the partial eclipse from the Jersey shore. And I don't remember too much about it. I just remember, doing it. So it has always been in the back of my mind. But, school and medical school and my surgical training, just didn't allow me, to kind of take astronomy really seriously as a hobby that would cost a lot of money and, require traveling. But having said that, I knew about the 1991 eclipse, in Mexico, the big one, 6 minutes and 53 seconds. But if anybody knows anything about surgical training, surgical residents start their year basically at the end in June and July. And that was a July eclipse. And that was my first, my first month of my second year of plastic surgery training. So as a senior resident in plastic surgery, you cannot get a vacation in July. So, I could not go to Mexico. I knew about it, but I couldn't go. And then, my next one that I wanted to get to, now I'm in practice in Alabama. And I think it was 1998. There was that eclipse, that went through Aruba. And, that's not a bad flight from Alabama. But I was like in my mid 4th year of my solo private practice. I just didn't think I could do an international trip and take 6 or 7 days away. Plus the weather prospects for Aruba were, marginal. So I didn't go to that one. So then the next one that was clear that I had to go to was 2001 in Zambia, Africa, because it was a long eclipse, 3 minutes, 53 seconds in the middle of the dry season. So even though it was a long international flight, you had like over a 90% chance of seeing it. And plus it went right over the capital city of Lusaka. So you could fly, right into the international airport. So I went to that one. So that was my first one, 2001. And it was wonderful.
2001.
Yeah.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
That was a great one.
It was nice and high up. And that was actually the first one I did see.
Really?
Shadow bands.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I
got shadow bands on that one.
Okay. I didn't see him in 2001. I saw him for the first time in 2002 when we went, back to Africa. But anyway, that's how I got to my first one. My practices settled down. It was a good weather prospect eclipse. I have a slide that I put in my talks, and it's in my book, and it's kind of like a 3-seat seesaw. And it's labeled number 1, number 2, number 3. And number 1 is, of course, you're balancing the pros and cons of 3 things on this 3-seat seesaw. So number 1 is weather prospects. Number 2 is totality duration. And number 3 is logistics, right? Can you get to the place in the path that you need to go to? And in the case of international travel, is it a safe country to go to? And at the time, Zambia was stable in 2001. So it was a no-brainer. So when you look at if you look at that 3 seesaw seat matrix for Zambia in 2001, right? Weather prospects were great. Totality duration was pretty good at 3 minutes and 53 seconds.
What?
And even though it's a long international flight, the logistics were good because you're flying into the path and it's a stable country. So I have that slide in my talk all the time. So when people are thinking about international eclipses or even thinking about traveling cross country, in the United States, those are still the 3 most important things in the matrix.
Yeah, it is. But the number 1 being path of totality.
Yeah, getting to the path, right?
Getting to the path.
Yeah, of course.
No, I went to Lusaka for that one also. And that one was, sadly, my flight connected me through South Africa and they didn't have me booked straight into Lusaka. So I ended up going through Harare.
Oh, okay.
Which was a little scary.
Yeah.
And I talk about it in my book.
Yeah.
I was kind of one of the few times I got really scared.
Yeah.
But I ended up being safe and everything else. And everybody was nice. It was just, they were just desperate.
Yeah. It was a desperate place. 2002, we went back to Zimbabwe and flew into Harare. And Zimbabwe was bad in 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's ultimately why I ended up going to Australia for that one,
Well,
even though it was only a 30-second eclipse.
Yeah.
I think in Africa, you got like a minute.
It's a minute 23 where we were.
Yeah.
Minute 23 seconds. So that was my shortest eclipse, a minute 23. But that was a great one. You know, a lot of people, I guess, didn't go to Africa for that one. And I went to that one with a little small group. There were only about 16 of us. And the lead guy was Bill Kramer. You know, you guys have heard of Bill Kramer.
Oh, yeah.
So it was wonderful to do that eclipse with him. A little small group. We were on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, right on the center line. It was just great. It was just a great one. You know, as opposed to 19, Chris, you know, we're in that field with 400 people.
Yeah. I'd spoken to another eclipse trip planner, and he's like, "You are crazy." He's like, "That is just nuts to try to go out into that field." But they managed it so well because there were 14 different tour groups within that group. And so everybody had their own itinerary.
Yeah.
And we were on the 9-day itinerary, and there were 21-day itineraries.
Yeah.
I don't know if I thought we were on the same one, but people were going to 5 different countries. And
right.
We only had Argentina and Chile on our, and they put everybody in that same field, all the itineraries collected in one spot. And it was
it sounds like China. China did you do that one? Did you get to that one?
I did not.
Gordon?
No.
Okay. Well, China kind of put everybody in one spot in a solar eclipse village.
Yeah.
And there were several thousand eclipse chasers out there.
Wow.
It was a sea of eclipse chasers.
It went pretty well. There were only a few people with their flashes going off, you know, and they were in front of us. We put all the photographers in the back, and everybody who had imaging rigs set up on the back row and back rail and on the road. And I remember one girl, local, starts running through at about 30 seconds or about a minute before totality. And our buddy Nick James starts screaming at her, like, "Get down, get down." She's like, "What?" But she doesn't speak English.
Yeah.
She's like, "What are you yelling at me about?" Like,
yeah, that was a little disconcerting. You know, it was a long bus ride to that field. And, you know, I had a lot of gear to set up, and we didn't get there with much extra time. And, you know, they drop you off out of the bus, and you're trying to get your bearings. And, man,
maybe an hour?
I was stressed.
Yeah. I went through stress too. My rig broke down, and I had to go into manual mode. And put the script in test mode and just hit it and then enjoy the event. But it's certainly not enough time to get set up and be confident with your gear. And
no, it wasn't.
Well, I just don't like traveling into the zone that day. I just want to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
So how much gear are you bringing for 2024? I'm curious.
You know, I'm actually kind of putting it together right now. So I'll bring my regular Eclipse rig, which is a telescope based rig. You know, I've been using it with a small sensor, so it's been working at 900 millimeters for the past couple of eclipses. But I think I'm going to put a full frame sensor on it for this eclipse and work at 600 millimeters. So that'll be kind of my main rig. I actually want to do something that I've never done before. I want to do video at a high focal length. So I think I'm going to do video at about 1800 millimeters and just try to really get prominences and chromosphere with a video, with a camera, a DSLR camera doing video on the back of a Meade ETX. So that's, you know, one thing I want to do. And then I have a hydrogen alpha system that I've never taken to an eclipse before. Just because of international travel, it's just too heavy and you're not going to use it. The only reason I want to bring it to this one is because then ahead of time you can see where the good prominences are, just to know. There's not much you can do about it, but it's really just to know.
Yeah.
It's also cool to show everybody. That's the one you can show off to everybody during the partial.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome.
Yeah. And it's fun.
I'm taking hours.
I mean, if they're nice prominences, it's fun to show people prominences through an HA, system. So yeah.
Yeah. I had a Coronado 270, had it set up with a camera on it, and the camera broke. It was like an ASI 1600M, and it died. on the spot. And so I had to take it apart and just put the eyepiece on it. And people looked through it and were just amazed. Like, it was so fun to share that with people and like, hey, check this out. And they've never looked through a hydrogen alpha scope before. So it was really fun to share that with people.
Plus the sunspots really pop.
Yeah.
And we should have a lot of sunspots for this eclipse on the partial phases.
Yeah, I hope we do. Yeah, I hope we do. So yeah, that'll be kind of the camera stuff. I'm really, I want to do a lot of my partial phase experiments here. So I'll be monitoring regular lux and the change in the percentage of red, green, and blue wavelength monitoring. I'm going to do 2 of those. I'll do temperature monitoring. I've for the group that we're going to be with, I have little, I'm calling them science stations, but I have little stations set up for people to do the sharp and fuzzy shadow experiment, to do pinhole projection, my temperature monitoring, just so that the crowd that's there can enjoy the partial phase phenomena science.
That's a good idea. I'm definitely going to borrow, or may I have your permission to use the shadow one?
Oh yeah, sure.
I really want to set that one up. I want to use that. I want to set that one up. I want to set up the shadow bands, and then because at least you can explain shadow bands during the partial eclipse and prior to it happening,
right? And
then trying to figure out what else I'm going to do to kind of entertain the crowd.
Yeah. While
the partial phases are happening.
Understand. Yeah.
Besides drinking too early. No drinking till after the E shows.
Yeah, Leticia, what for the sharp and fuzzy shadow experiment that we talked about, I'm on kind of my third or kind of iteration of that experiment that I do with the little bars. But what you should do is just bring like a thin aluminum rulers, like little 1-foot rulers, and then just have people hold them up in one direction, and then you have them turn it 90 degrees. Yeah, that's exactly right. So something like that, right? Okay. So after about a 50% eclipse, you can start to see the effects of sharp and fuzzy shadows. And so you need another white background to do it nicely. And what they do is you have them hold the ruler up and rotate it slowly 90 degrees back and forth. And when the shadows become sharp, they're in line with the crescent behind them. And when the shadows become fuzzy, they're 90 degrees to the crescent in the sky behind them, because obviously they're looking down at the ground at their shadow. And depending on where you are in the path will depend on the angle that the sharp shadows happen, right? Because it's going to match the pitch of the crescent in the sky. So that's a real easy experiment. For my little science station, just to make it easy, I cut out boards that already have a 90-degree angle in them and a little handle at the bottom. So they can take this little 90-degree angle and they can rotate it. And as one gets sharp, the other will get fuzzy.
Okay.
Yeah. I love that experiment. So I'm taking, I did a really interesting thing. I want to take that experiment to the next level. So my little 3-bar sharp and fuzzy shadow experiment is actually going to track the sun this time. I have it on a guider, on a tracker. So I'm going to I want to get time-lapse photography of the sharp and fuzzy shadows coming and going right through the whole eclipse. Well, I tested it at the annular in Mexico. I tested guiding the sharp and fuzzy shadow experiment, and it worked great. It worked really great. So I'm really excited about it for the total. The annular in Mexico was hard because it was a morning eclipse. It started in the morning for us, and it's really hard to anticipate the angle of the crescent as it's rising up the ecliptic, so I don't think I had the angle perfect, but it still worked really well. I was really excited about it. It'll be much easier in Texas to get it really dialed in.
Yeah, because sun will be much higher in the
Right.
sky.
That's right.
So would you use your guider to move that, or are you just going to use that to track? Like, would you try to adjust it so that it does line up with it, and then you track along? Or
Yeah. So that's exactly right. So what I have to do is I have to calculate the angle of the bar that will follow the progression of the crescent that's going to get thinner. So that will be the bar that I have to calculate the angle on the ecliptic. And then I'll have another bar that's 90 degrees to that. And then it'll be on the tracker. And it, just like if you're doing tracking for photography, the whole rig will track the sun.
Okay. I'm just wondering if I can just tape one onto my husband's tracker for his camera. I don't know if he'll appreciate that. Here, honey, put the stick on your camera, balance it out.
And then, when you're on the lighting effects like that, that's one of them. And then, of course, you want to have people enjoy pinhole projection, right? The concept of camera obscura, the fact that your pinholes will be upside down and reversed left to right. So put a white sheet under a tree if there's a tree there so people can see the natural holes made by the leaves projecting the crescents to the ground. And then I always make little stamped name plates, if you want to put your name on it or solar eclipse timer or whatever, and then you can project the shadows, to some kind of name. I made up one that just has the date of this eclipse for the crowd. Then I brought we have a little colander packed for the people to do the colander thing, right. And a little cheese grater pack that will be at that station for people to project it, through the cheese grater holes. That's always a good one. That's always entertaining.
I was actually going to do something similar, but make it like a photo op opportunity to where you have like Eclipseboro. It's Hillsboro. They're calling themselves Eclipseboro, right, with the date. And then everybody can get under there and get their selfies done.
Yeah. Yeah.
As the partial progresses. I think that'll be good. Yeah.
And then, so those are the main lighting effects that I like to teach about. The other thing is the thermodynamic effects. So there's a couple that are easy, and then there's a couple that are hard. Of course, the easy one is temperature change, right? People are going to feel the temperature drop. It's a good experiment for school kids to just get a good quality, even just liquid thermometer. If they don't have a good digital thermometer, put it in the shade so it's not under direct sunlight. Have it about 4 or 5 feet above the ground, and just have them plot the temperature drop. Put temperature in the y-axis and time in the x-axis from C1 to C4. And every 5 minutes, have them take a little reading of the temperature. I think in Texas, kind of low, flat terrain, I think for this long eclipse, we should get a 12 or 15 degree, drop in temperature.
At least.
Yeah. So that's fun to do. And that's, what's interesting about temperature is people have to realize that it seems pretty basic, but it's a real thermodynamic effect that you're measuring because, our ambient temperature at your observation site is a function of the ground absorbing energy. It's not a function of the air absorbing energy. So the ground absorbs energy, and as the partial phases decrease, less or increase, less energy is delivered to the ground, and that's what is affecting our ambient temperature. So it's a real good model of what's happening as the sun's getting turned off. So that's a good one for students. I think everybody should do that. I kind of always take it to the next level with my little digital loggers. And this is going to sound crazy. I'll explain it to you, but Jay Anderson did this a long time ago, and I want to reproduce the experiment. Is that if you have calm conditions on eclipse day, you can actually document a little mini temperature inversion layer. So I've built this little portable PVC tower that I can put together at the eclipse site. It's 20 feet tall, and I'll have a monitor at 20 feet, one at 10 feet, one at about 5 feet, so it's about face level, one at 6 inches, and one on the ground, just buried with a little bit of sand, just so it's representing the absorption of the radiant energy. And if you have calm conditions, what should happen is the ground one should cool before the 20-foot sensor as the partial phases are progressing. And it should happen just the opposite after totality. The ground sensor should warm before the 20-foot sensor. So I want to try to document that. You have to have perfect conditions. If there's a lot of air mixing, you might not see that subtle inversion layer. I did a test of it a couple of weeks ago, and it worked great. It just really worked great. So I think it's going to work.
Okay. That's an interesting one to try to do.
Yeah, I think everybody should do a little temperature experiment. It's real easy. Just hang some kind of thermometer in the shade, so it's not in direct sunlight, about 4 feet, 5 feet off the ground, and just monitor the temperature. It's fun to do.
So are you monitoring your 20-foot electronically, I take it?
Yeah, so I use these little data loggers called thermochron eye buttons, and you program them with your computer to start to log. And they're little. I have a picture of them in my book. They're less than the size of a penny, so they have a very small thermal mass. So they respond to changes in temperature very quickly once they're equilibrated. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when did you start on Solar Eclipse Timer? Because you had it for 2017, but I thought it was pretty well established by then.
It was.
So when did you start trying?
Yeah, so the story actually goes back to 2001. So in 2001 at my first eclipse, that's before YouTube. That's before a lot of eclipse sites on the internet. So back then, Leticia, you remember this, you had to read books. If you wanted to learn anything about eclipse photography or eclipse science, you had to read it. There was not much help. And you would mail away, you remember, for the NASA Eclipse Bulletin. Yes. You would send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Fred Espenick at Goddard, and he would send you that Eclipse Bulletin back. And he and Jay Anderson would publish it about 18 months or so before the next eclipse. But that's basically all you had, right? Well, I read all of Fred's stuff, and I looked at all his pictures, and I saw some pictures of the things he did on the internet, and I practiced like crazy for that eclipse. I mean, I practiced in my living room with a camera doing dry runs in dark conditions, so I knew where my buttons and switches were, because back then we're using film on DSLR cameras, and they didn't have these lit up LCD screens where you could read what you're doing. It got dark very quickly. You had to know your dials, by memory. Well, anyway, I thought I was prepared, but as we were getting to second contact, I was so overwhelmed by the changes in lighting, the crickets going crazy, the crowd getting excited, the sky color changing, that I completely missed second contact. I mean, I started taking my first pictures at chromosphere. I'd missed all the diamond ring. I'd missed all of Bailey's beads. I was just overwhelmed. So then I did pretty good during totality. We had 3 minutes and 53 seconds, and I took good pictures of Corona. That eclipse had Jupiter up there in the sky. I think 5 degrees away from it was beautiful. And I framed some shots of the Corona and Jupiter. And then I'm sitting there with my wife-to-be in this field, and we're watching the Corona, and all of a sudden it's getting bright in the sky. Because it was over. I mean, third contact came and I was late again. So my first pictures at third contact were already well into diamond ring. I'd missed chromosphere and Bailey's beads again. Well, I got back to the States and I said to myself, I realized you cannot time an eclipse with your watch. It's just too overwhelming, especially if it's your first one. So I actually developed the first eclipse timer after my 2001 eclipse that we used for the 2002 eclipse. And it ran on Windows, either desktop or Windows Pocket PC, because back then we didn't have cell phones. We used to have what they called personal digital assistants. And the
BlackBerries.
Yeah, well, no, it was even before BlackBerries, because this is before cell service. They were called little compact iPacks. And they were basically a little handheld computer with no cell service, no geolocation, no anything. But anyway, I made the first Eclipse timer for 2002. But it was completely manual. So you couldn't geolocate and calculate the contact times. You had to extrapolate your contact times from the NASA Eclipse bulletin. And there was error in that. Now, Bill Kramer was smart enough that he could do the math. He could actually do the long algebra to figure out the contact times. But we were still off. We were off by 4 or 5 seconds. So you would put the contact times into my timer manually. And that was the first concept of a timer talking back to you. So you didn't have to look at your watch, and it counted down to the times. It had partial phase phenomena reminders in it, and it worked great. We used it in 2002 in Africa, except that we were about 4 or 5 seconds off. So then I had my next eclipse was 2006, and I did that one on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean Sea. And you can't really precisely time an eclipse on a cruise ship because they keep on moving, so you can't really do it. And then you talked about China, Leticia. There was that little group of eclipses between 2006 and 2017 that were really hard to get to. And between my practice and my family, I couldn't do that China trip. So I had a dry period up to 2017. Between 2006 and 2017, I didn't get to an eclipse. But by that time, mobile phones had come out, right? In 2009, I guess the iPhone was released. So in 2016, I started to get a programmer to rewrite Solar Eclipse Timer for mobile devices. So in 17, that was version 1. It only had the 2017 eclipse in it. When you downloaded it and you bought it for $1.99, it only timed 2017. So it was kind of the test version, and it ran great. I mean, I had such great stories from people about how it helped them, enjoy the eclipse. And then version 2 and version 3, because there were a bunch of international eclipse coming up, I changed the format to be in-app purchasing. So you could purchase the eclipse you wanted to go to. It came with all of them in there. You just kind of had to unlock it. And that's the way the version is now. So the last eclipse in the list is 2024. I mean, 17's in there, 19's in there, 2021, and even the hybrid in Australia is in there. But right now they're in there as test mode. So you can play with them, but I don't want anybody using that data set because it would be wrong, right? So it's kind of locked. You can play with it still, but you can't use it for the eclipse.
I thought somebody used it on the 2023.
They did. They used it in 23, but after the 23 eclipse, I had to take it out of being able to be used because I didn't want somebody to accidentally load that data set for 24 because it's going to calculate the wrong contact times. You know what I mean? Right. So they're still in there if you want to play with them, but you can't use it. But then, so the last eclipse in the app right now is 24. And, I have to decide if I want to keep on trying to support this app in the future, for 26 in Spain and then 27 in Egypt. I don't know. It's a lot of work. It's a ton of work.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, I'm sure it is because you're doing it across platforms. You're doing both iOS and Android, right?
That's right. Yeah. And every year iOS and Android change little things in the programming, so it's constant updating, constant testing. They changed something in Android 14 that I had to do a lot of testing on to make sure that was not going to affect the way that we scheduled notifications. So I went out and bought 3 new test phones just to test Android 14, and it's running great. But boy, every time they make a switch in the deep programming, it creates headaches.
Oh, I bet.
But anyway, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I really helped a lot of people in 17. A lot of people used it in 19. I think it's going to just help a lot of people in 24.
Totality Talks is brought to you by TexasSolarEclipses.com. where you can get the book Texas Solar Eclipses. Learn about solar eclipse safety, the total solar eclipse in Texas of 1878, how technology influences our experience, and citizen eclipse science then and now. That's TexasSolarEclipses.com. Click the link down below.
And that's the other news. You guys had Fred Espenek on already, and I listened to that interview. It was wonderful. He told a lot of stories about his background at NASA that I hadn't known, about. But anyway, so in the spring, Fred messaged me and wanted to talk about the app because he recommended it in 2017. What he wanted, what other people have requested from me, but it's too hard to do. A lot of people want you to be able to put in like a custom announcement, to be able to record your own announcement at a time where you want it to remind you to do something. That's just an overwhelming thing to try to program and then support, as the developer. But anyway, Fred, even though he scripts his eclipse photography right now, he doesn't do it manually. He still likes to know where he stands in the timing of the eclipse. So I worked with Fred to have this mode for 2024 called photographer's mode. And when you toggle that on, the app no longer makes any of those partial phase phenomena announcements about temperature changes or sharp and fuzzy shadows or pinhole projection or animal behavior or any of that. All of the announcements are based on timing so that you know where you stand as a photographer, how close you're getting to C2, then the normal countdowns for C2. And then even during totality, there's new announcements in there that are timing to C3. So you know when you're approaching to C3. And that's what Fred wanted, and that's what we did. So I'm really excited, to work with him to have this photographer's mode. The only spoken statements in there other than speaking the times is there is a reminder for remove solar filters, because you don't want to forget that. I left in the reminder for max eclipse so people know when they're at the midpoint. And there's a reminder for replace camera filters. So those are the only other spoken statements other than timing statements. And I actually tested it for the annular. The annular didn't have a data set in there, but because I'm the developer, I had a workaround so that I could use photographer's mode at the annular as I had another app running for the annular too. Even though the data set was not in there, I could do it. And it worked great. The photographer's mode worked great at the annular. So I know it's ready for 24. So I'm excited about that. I'll have two phones going in 24. I'll have a phone on the regular mode to announce the partial phase phenomena through little speakers for kind of the regular crowd. And then right next to me, I'll have another phone going with photographer's mode. That's another thing I need to send you guys if you want to put it in the notes for this show. I have some really helpful worksheets that are downloadable from my website. One is an eclipse checklist, the things you should check off to bring to your observation site. The other one is if you're going to use my app to take partial phase images, we can talk about that in a minute. I have a worksheet where you can print that out blank and then write in your times. I also have a worksheet for the photographer's mode setting so that it has all of the times that mode is going to announce something. So the photographers can write their own custom chores in for any particular time that they want to do something. It might be refocus. It might be turn on some wide angle camera behind you. Whatever you want to do, you can have your own little reminder. And as an eclipse photographer who still does it manually, one of the things that drives me crazy is the charts that are out there on the internet right now for counting your camera stops, like full stops, half stops, third stops for shutter speed, ISO, and f-stop. They drive me crazy because they always want to center it around the full stop. because that's the way they think about it. I don't think about it that way as an eclipse photographer. I want to be able to easily count third stops. I want to just be able to see that in a row. So I made up a master stop sheet that's color coded that has all of that the way I look at it. Now, other people may not look at it that way, but I will provide you that link. And I think that PDF, so people can download it, I think it'll be very helpful for eclipse photographers who are not scripting and are trying to figure out their exposures.
So one of the things, so I don't take the pictures, my husband does, or people around me.
Right.
And then I just very nicely ask because I'm very much into the moment. And
Right.
one of the things I've been recommending for first timers, and like you said, in 2001, you kind of lost yourself
Right.
in the moment of the eclipse. Do you recommend doing something as complex as you do for your first time?
No, I definitely don't recommend what I do. No, absolutely not. And that's the great thing about this eclipse. It's a long eclipse. So I think I can do what I want to do. I always try to get all of my fiddling around done by max eclipse so I can enjoy the second half of the eclipse with not fiddling around. That's harder on short eclipses. But this time I do intend to spend some time just peering at it and using binoculars. I used binoculars in 17 to see Regulus up there in the corona. It was beautiful. In 19 in Argentina, that was kind of a short eclipse. I think we were at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And I was fumbling with cameras during that eclipse. I forgot to use my binoculars, although I did get a good, view of that eclipse setting over the Andes Mountains. I mean, that was just wonderful.
That's beautiful.
But yeah, I'm not in the school of thought that a lot of eclipse chasers will tell people who are going to their first one to not photograph it, just watch it. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. I think it's really easy to take your own personal little photograph of it that you'll cherish. You also have to remember that the next good eclipse we're going to have that's going to cross the country, that's not going to require international travel. There's a little one in the upper Midwest that will be 2044, but the next big one is 2045. That's a long time from now. So I think people, if you just practice a little bit and if you have a DSLR camera at home that can get up to about 500 millimeters, go ahead and learn how to take a few shots and you'll be able to cherish them and talk to your friends about them. It will not take a long time. There's some minor things you have to get right. But even a bad eclipse photo of your own is better than buying something off the internet that you had no association with.
My favorite one is one I did with a point and shoot in 2003 out of an airplane window, and I just happened to catch the moon shadow on the ice with the sun coming off, and it's a point and shoot. I can't blow it up anymore.
Right, right.
A little point and shoot.
Well, that's a good point too. Wide angle eclipse photography is actually fine. And in my talks, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to try to take eclipse pictures with their cell phones, which is fine. You're not going to be able to zoom in and do much. But I have little pictures that I put in my talks that I tell people, if you're going to use your cell phone, that's fine, but buy one of those little cell phone tripod adapters so you can put your cell phone on a tripod. They have a little 1/4-20 thread on the bottom, so you can put them on a regular tripod and you can take a picture with your cell phone, especially during totality on wide angle. You'll do fine just on manual mode. On automatic mode, just let it take it.
So on the 2 eclipses that I went without my husband, so I had to, do my own photography. I did have one camera aimed at the sun, but most of my cameras were iPads and my phones just kind of pointed around.
Right.
And that's
the one that worked was the one that the point and shoot, wasn't it?
I know. No, actually, no. It was my overexposed one. Was my my husband's camera that he let me use. He let me use the old camera, not even the good one.
But you got great outer corona image.
Got great outer corona.
Yeah,
I got the cloud moving in right at totality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, that was
2020. We had that's when I That's when I met Leticia.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Pandemic.
In Argentina, the pandemic eclipse.
Yeah, the pandemic eclipse. Yep. Yeah. Let's talk about another partial phase phenomena. We talked about the two main lighting ones, right? Pinhole projection and sharp and fuzzy shadows. And we talked about temperature, which is a thermodynamic one. The other great one that might be good in this eclipse, since it's an April eclipse, is the formation and dissipation of convective clouds. So, I have a big chapter in my book about that because I find it really interesting. And so that also has to do with energy delivered to the ground. So if you're in an area where there's going to be some moisture in the fields, or there's a low-lying valley, next to you, you will see, if the morning is clear, and obviously we all hope that the morning is clear, you will see by 10 or 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, there'll be some white puffy clouds that will show up in the sky. And those might start to concern you. But if they are those white, fluffy, light convective clouds, they're being created by the energy getting delivered to the ground and creating these warm, moist thermals, which are invisible, but they rise up to the boundary layer. And because of the decrease in temperature and pressure, they condense and they make those light, fluffy clouds. So what happens during the eclipse, that point of time between C1 and C2 is like a short day. It's like a short diurnal cycle. And you're decreasing the energy to the ground, and those thermals are decreasing. So the convective clouds that already got formed do not have their supply of moisture from the ground anymore, and they evaporate. And it's a wonderful thing to watch. I saw it in real time in 2017. It was fascinating. So you'll see these white fluffy clouds up there, and between 10 and 15 minutes before totality, they'll just start to evaporate. Now, I'm not talking about big rain clouds with a gray bottom. Those are a different beast, and they will not have time to evaporate. I'm talking about those summertime white fluffy clouds that usually pop up by lunchtime when the morning is clear. Those are really fun to watch dissipate. That's a really interesting thermodynamic phenomena.
Gordon, I had the exact opposite happen in Nashville, Tennessee in 2017, where we had clear skies in the morning. Perhaps it had been moist the night before, and clear skies, and then it clouded up immensely right before totality. We found a lucky hole, thankfully. And then 30 minutes after totality, it all cleared off again. What's going on there?
I watched satellite imagery of Nashville for that eclipse. I think there were parts of Nashville that were just unlucky. I don't think that was a convective cloud thermodynamic effect. I think that was just the front moving through. Those were big rain clouds. They were thick. Some people were unfortunate. A big cloud just just moved in front of totality during the time. I don't think that was a thermodynamic effect in 17.
Sure. Interesting.
At Nashville.
I know. It'll be interesting. Texas is going to be interesting because it's where I'm at in Hillsboro. It's 50-50.
Yeah.
It's right at 50-50. So it could be 50% clouds, like you're talking about, those convective puffy clouds that could go away.
Right.
It could be just that day decided to cover up. The next day is going to be clear.
Yeah, I know. The whole path Texas is like that. Mexico certainly has the best, predicted weather. But, I didn't want to turn this one into an international eclipse. It's something I can drive to with a lot of gear. I just want to take my chances. Now, I'm not taking full chances. So here's my crazy plan. This eclipse is a little different than 17 in the South. And it has to do with the fact that you guys have all seen these weather fronts that run through the South, where they have kind of an arc to them that goes from the Southwest to the Northeast. They're long, they're elongated, and they kind of travel a little bit to the Northeast. Well, you see, in 17, that crossed the path perpendicularly. So if you were going to be in a bad weather front in 17, you could drive 150 miles to the east or the west and get out of it. in 24, if we're having a bad day, that type of weather front could be over the path for hundreds and hundreds of miles, right?
Yeah.
So I have a secondary site all planned out in Missouri, 600 miles away. So my primary site is in Texas. But if it looks like the weather's going to be bad in Texas, I've got a better chance 600 miles away that front is not up there. Not assured, but a better chance. So this is not an eclipse. If you're in bad weather in Texas, that you might be able to drive 75 miles one way or the other, because it's probably going to overlay the path.
So you're going to take your whole family that 600 miles up?
Well, so here's the deal. We'll make the decision ahead of time. One of the people in my group is an AccuWeather meteorologist, and I subscribe to AccuWeather Professional. So I know the radars and the predicted imagery that he follows. And he will help us make the call probably 5 days before the eclipse where we're going to go. So we're going to go to one or the other. We're not going to try to travel on the day.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm speaking I'm emceeing the event. So I'm there.
Yeah. I understand.
Plus I've got 20 friends and family and my 80-year-old parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're there.
Yeah, I mean, look, the whole path is tricky for an April eclipse. I mean, anywhere can be a nightmare. Anywhere can be clear. You just don't know. That's what's so distressing about being an eclipse chaser, is dealing with the weather.
Yeah, it's part of the challenge.
It is.
Yeah. So of my 20, I've had 2 cloud outs.
Really?
So I've been pretty lucky.
That's really good.
I've been pretty lucky.
Yeah, that's really good.
So.
I've only had one. I was with
know.
Leticia.
Antarctica.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Antarctica was really risky. Really risky.
That was a very risky one.
Yeah.
That was a very risky one. It was 10% chance.
Yeah.
It was a 10% chance of seeing it. And one cruise boat did see it out of the 11 that I know of that went there. One saw it.
That's right.
So there's your 10%.
Yeah, of course. And that was the one with Jay Anderson, because he knew where to go. Yeah.
That figures.
But I mean, I mean, that's a typical example of applying my matrix to what eclipse you're going to travel internationally for. In fact, I use that eclipse in my book when I talk about a bad eclipse matrix, and I use Egypt as a good eclipse matrix. Because, I mean, Antarctica had everything bad about it. It had terrible weather, a short duration, and terribly expensive logistics. So if you're going to use the matrix, that's not the one to choose, right? But now talk about Egypt, right? Great weather, a long eclipse, and logistically not that bad. I mean, it's a long flight, but Egypt is relatively stable. So if you apply the matrix to that, Egypt's almost a no-brainer. So yeah, that's
great.
That's how you apply that 3-seat matrix.
Yeah.
So is that where you decided to go for 27?
Yeah, we're on the list for somewhere for 27 already. I haven't decided about 26 yet. Still working on that.
Yeah, I pretty well decided on a Airbnb in hopefully Centerline in Spain for a month.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go ahead and take a month because I was looking at Greenland, but back to your matrix,
right? It
was very expensive.
Yep.
Cloud out, trying to chase the eclipse in northern climes and possibly get cloud out.
Yeah.
I ended up deciding on a Airbnb in Spain for a month.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's what I'm going to do. I want to go to Spain. There's no question. I just don't know exactly where I want to go.
I'm still deciding. I want to get an Airbnb in the path for like the 3 or 4 days of Totality, and then spend the rest of it in Barcelona.
I understand.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So how does the matrix look for 28?
Which one's 28?
Australia,
right over Sydney.
Yeah. Okay. There's 2 in Australia. The one that crosses Sydney. The thing that interests me about that eclipse is actually not going to Sydney. It's going to northwest Australia. I think the point of greatest eclipse is up there in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
I've always wanted to do an eclipse where I can get to the actual point of greatest eclipse. I actually thought about that for the 2020 eclipse in Argentina. And I actually was communicating with people down there, trying to find out who owned the field where the point of greatest eclipse was, but I couldn't find out. And there's this whole issue down there about the locals not trusting the oil companies. I don't really know the background of all of that. So I never could find out. And then COVID hit. So I just gave up on the whole thing. Yeah. The point of greatest eclipse is pretty close in Egypt, but it's out in the middle of the desert and it's in the summer. It'd be 130 degrees. You can't get there. But that Australia one is actually pretty interesting.
I was looking at Devil's Marbles. I think it's really close to a place called Devil's Marbles.
Really?
And there's like a motel there.
Interesting.
I was looking at for that one.
Yeah, I haven't looked that far ahead. I mean, I looked at Australia a little bit. I have the next 10 eclipses in my book with a little bit of an overview. In fact, I'm going to go to that chapter right now.
Yeah. It's a hobby. I plan eclipses 5 or 6 years out. This will look good.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, let's just kind of Google. Let's go to Google Earth and kind of see what's around.
Yeah, so 28's the one that goes over Sydney, but I don't think I want to go to Sydney. I want to go to the northwest and try to get on the point of greatest eclipse. And then I'll tell you an interesting one is 30 in Australia. You know, Chris, that could be another setting eclipse because it sets in Australia. That could be really fun. So it starts in Africa. It's a morning eclipse in Africa, but it's a late eclipse in Australia. I want to get to that one and see it really low. So that's what I'm thinking about for that one.
Yeah, that's the risk. Is the lower it gets, the more of a risk you're taking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Well, Dan McClellan's the Eclipse 2024, his little simulator, though, he has it timed to where it'll take into account the elevation. So definitely play around with that when you're trying to figure out where exactly you're going to be.
Yeah, for the atmospheric interference for photography. Right. But I think what Chris is talking about is there's always like more of a chance of low-lying clouds. I don't know much about the climatology in Australia. I'll have to look on that. I imagine it's pretty arid out there, but I don't know that for sure. One eclipse at a time. I'm just trying to get through 24 right now.
Yeah.
Me too.
Like, what are we going to do after 24 for the next 28 months?
Oh, I've got plans. I have plans already. I've got plans already.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been working pretty hard to get ready for 24. Just trying to get all my stuff prepared and just do talks and everything I've been doing to try to help. It's hard.
Yeah. It's amazing how many people don't even know it's coming still.
That is a great point. I've talked to some people in Texas, the Burnett area, and I've asked them and I've sent them some eclipse classes. But before that, I've asked them, I was calling for different reasons, but I've asked them, I've said, like, I'm sure you've heard about the eclipse. And like, kind of for most people, it's like in the back of their mind. I mean, it's crossing over their town and it's like still not in the front of their mind. And it's 2 months from the eclipse. I was astounded.
I know. It's coming right over now.
I know. They're not into it as much as we are. I mean, that's probably a good thing for them.
But you see one. Yeah. You see one.
But you see one. Hey, I just want everybody to understand me. I was asked today, what do you hope to get out of this eclipse after it passes? After the day after the eclipse, what do you hope? I just hope a bunch of people finally understand me and finally get me.
Right. We talked about shadow bands a little bit. Let's just talk about those two final lighting effects. And this is the one in 2017, I talked a lot about shadow bands. For this eclipse, I'm talking about the Purkinje effect a lot, which is that the effect that gives you that gray, eerie, silvery tone to the color of your surroundings within that final 5 minutes before totality. Mm-hmm. And what that's due to is the fact that when you are in such a low lighting situation, because remember, I tell people that an eclipse, in terms of the lux, is like being in a room with no windows with very bright lights. And there's somebody with a dimmer switch that can turn down the lights very slowly over an hour and a half, because that's basically what's happening. So we have an amazing amount of time to dark adapt. But there gets to be a point within about 5 to 7 minutes before totality where you can't dark adapt anymore. So your photopic vision, the vision that lets you see colors in regular daylight, starts to not function as well. And your scotopic vision, where your rods take over, they start to be uninhibited and they start to work. So you're in this little zone where your color sensors, the cones, are not working well, and your rods are starting to work. And that's called the Purkinje effect. And that's what makes all the colors in your surroundings get bland and gray, especially the reds. So what I'm telling people to do for this eclipse is to tell all your friends and family to wear bright colored clothes to the observation site, especially reds and greens. Because I realized between 2017 and 2019, because in 19, I didn't see a good Purkinje effect. And I realized why. To perceive the Purkinje effect, you have to have the target colors in your surroundings. If your surroundings are all bland, brown, grays, you can't see the Purkinje effect because you have nothing for your retina to decrease that tonal perception with. So I don't know what the path is going to be like through all these states. Like, I don't know how well things are going to green up in the Northeast, in April, or what the fields are going to be like in Texas in April. So I'm telling people to tell their families to wear bright red and bright green clothes to the eclipse. So you can look at your neighbor and you can tell if the red in their shirt is more gray looking than you saw it 20 minutes ago. It's an amazing effect. I saw it so dramatically in 2017 that I want to see it again. And I was looking for it in 19, but you remember, Chris, we were on that dirt field with no foliage, and everybody was wearing kind of winter color clothes. So there was no bright colors. And if you don't have bright colors, you can't see the Purkinje effect. So tell all of your friends to wear bright clothes to the eclipse site, no matter what the temperature is, no matter if it looks ridiculous, dress in colors that are like summer. And then the final lighting effect is, of course, shadow bands. And shadow bands are caused by that last little slit of crescent within about 120 seconds to 90 seconds before C2, where that slit is coming around the side of the moon, and it's unperturbed light as it goes through all of space. But when it hits our atmosphere, that's when it gets perturbed. And it's a little, I guess the main theory for what's going on is that the upper levels of the atmosphere, where there's layers of hot or warm and cold air moving back and forth and swirling all about, is causing refraction of that slit. That may be true. My personal opinion is it happens a little lower, because I don't really think it's a scintillation effect like starlight, but whatever. You want to look for it about 90 seconds before the eclipse, or 2 minutes before the eclipse. Now, the thing about it is a lot of people miss it because they're not looking at the ground. They're looking, of course, at the partial phases getting narrower and narrower, and they're getting really excited about totality coming. So it's hard to force yourself to look at a white sheet on the ground. You have to bring a white sheet or white boards and put it on the ground. You have to force yourself to look down in that last 90 seconds. That's why my app reminds you to look for shadow bands 3 times after 2 minutes. It starts at 2 minutes, because you might not see them at 2 minutes. It might take to the 90-second or the 60-second call to see shadow bands. But you have to be reminded to look down, because it's a very exciting part of the eclipse. And then after C3, it's actually a better time to see shadow bands, because you're dark adapted, and that slit comes back very quickly. and it makes really better contrasty shadow bands for you to see after C3 because your eyes are dark adapted. So they're generally more distinct after C3. But again, you have to be reminded because the eclipse is going to be over. You're going to be high-fiving everybody. You're going to be all excited that you saw Totality, and you will not take the time to look down. So my app will remind you to look down for shadow bands. I think the call for shadow bands is 30 seconds after C3.
After C3, okay. Because I that's when we saw them in 2020. It was kind of cloudy, and so the shadow bands were just very dramatic on the field that we were at.
Interesting.
Actually,
and the other thing too, one of the interesting things that I'm not sure you're aware of, but the 4K cameras, especially the ones that are doing video, they will catch if you have a light clouds in front of the eclipse. They will catch the slit.
Well, we caught it that particular time.
Yeah,
we managed to. It was a very fast-moving, thin cloud,
right?
And a couple of us managed to capture thin shadow bands in those clouds.
In the clouds, I know. I would love to see that. I think I saw your pictures of that, Chris.
Yeah, it was an anomaly, I guess, or a very rare event.
Yeah.
At least that's what I was told, that you got lucky, buddy.
Well, when you think about it, it makes sense because the shadow bands are being created above that level of those clouds that you saw. So the refraction or the wave front add and subtraction, however you want to look at it, is already happening. You just need something to see it on. Now that can be a sheet on the ground, or it can be, thin clouds in the sky. That would be wonderful to see that refraction effect in the clouds above you. That would be just wonderful.
I don't know. Are our human eyes able to do that? Is that something that people have seen before? Shadow bands in the sky with their eyes? Because we didn't see it directly with our eyes. We saw it after the event, captured digitally. Yeah.
That's a good question. It might be that there's so much glare at the time that you wouldn't be able to see it in the clouds. That's kind of what happened to me with my shadow band video in 2019. I kind of misplanned that a little bit. I like to video shadow bands with my camera on a sheet facing towards umbra exit. I like to be facing away from umbra approach. But I didn't realize in 2019 that sun was going to be so low that it was, when I was putting the tripods up in front of my sheet, there were these big tripod shadows across the whole sheet. And I just didn't think about that ahead of time. So I made the decision on the fly at the observation site to face my shadow band cameras the other way towards umbra approach so that my tripod shadows were not across the sheet. But that caused an amazing amount of glare, and I do not have good shadow band video. I have a little bit of it, but it's not as good as it could have been because of a mistake I made, basically.
Okay. So there's one effect, I'm just wondering if you have a name for it. My first eclipse in 91 was on a beach in Mexico, and the sand just got really sparkly. You could almost see like the rainbow colors popping out of the sand.
Really? So
yeah, I
don't know if there's a name for that, but I imagine it has to do. Was it close to Totality, close to C2?
It was. No, it wasn't that close to C2. It was probably 15 minutes before C2. Really, the light was really changing.
Yeah. I imagine it just has to do with the fact that at that point, so when I explain this to people, I talk about the sun. When it's a full sun, we call that an extended source of light. So that means you have this big globe of sun up there, and the light rays can come to Earth and hit you in an infinite amount of directions, right? So light from the east side of the sun could be crossing to your west side, and light from the west side of the sun can be crossing to your east side in an infinite amount of crossing rays. But after about a 50% eclipse, and that's why the sharp and fuzzy shadow experiment works, light starts to hit Earth more linearly in one direction. So what you were probably seeing on those grains of sand was the fact that the linear light was lining up with some of the crystal reflections of that in that one direction. But when you have the full sun, that gets obliterated by the fact that there's no way it's going to reflect one angle because there's an infinite amount of angles. That's probably what you were seeing. That's a great description. I love that.
Yeah.
It's like an ultimate sharp and fuzzy shadow.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to do that with glass. So I line up the glass to see which ones are sparkly and which ones are not, or something.
Get you a bunch of sand.
Yeah.
Buy some sand and just sprinkle it out there, or sparkly things, bling. Just get some bling stuff.
Leticia, that's a great experiment. I think I'm going to do that in 24. You just gave me a great idea. I think I'm going to go to I don't know where I'll get them. I want something bigger than sand, like some store that sells like costume jewelry or something that you can buy like a handful of crystals that are reflective and maybe on the range of 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, and just throw them out on a dark plate and watch how they reflect the sun as the sun angles change. I bet you could reproduce that on a slightly larger scale so it's more easy to see and maybe even photograph. You just gave me a great idea for a new experiment.
I think we've talked to each other into a great idea. I may try the same thing. Because, like I said, I need to entertain people during partial, and it'd be nice if I had something sparkly out there.
Let's do that. That is a great idea. I am so happy we are talking and you brought that up. I'm doing it.
That's one of my best effects that I see on beaches.
Yeah.
It's just the sand just gets, or in deserts. In deserts, it'll happen the same thing.
I bet
2009 was like that.
That's what it is. That's the sunlight getting linear and being reflected off some facet of that sand.
Okay. We're gonna play around with that.
I bought your book today.
I saw
the physical copy.
Yeah. Okay, I'll ship it tomorrow.
Yeah, well, cool. Well, Jamie Carter showed it to us. And he's like, y'all have the book? Like, oh, well, I've got the app. And then he showed us the book and he's flipping through. I was like, well, better have that manual. We have to get that baby.
Yeah, so, Jamie and I have emailed back and forth since 2017. And it's too expensive to ship that book to Europe. I've had people ask me to ship it to Paris. One guy wanted me to ship it to Switzerland, but it costs $45 to ship it to Europe. So when I heard that Jamie was coming to Texas, I sent a book to his hotel so that he could pick it up there and have a hard copy. It's wonderful having the hard copy, in your hands to flip through. It's more expensive, obviously, because printing is so expensive. But the PDF version and, the iPad version is also great. I actually wrote the book originally for iPads because it's multimedia. It has built-in audio files. It has built-in video files, the picture galleries of clouds and diamond ring phase and all that are swipeable, so you can swipe through them. So the multimedia iPad version is really fun too.
So do both.
That's the one I actually have.
No, don't purchase both of them. I'll send you a link to get the PDF.
Okay. Because I like the field manual aspect of it.
Yeah.
But if there's a multimedia.
Well, I think I want to get the hard. After seeing that one that Jamie had today, I think I want a hard copy to use as a coffee table book.
Got to have one of those.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to talk to you guys and appreciate the support.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah. It's been great. You do a great job of
explaining things. I've been reading your post I've kind of been reading your book as you posted it on Facebook. Yeah.
So, what's been happening with Facebook? Facebook's basically becoming a VRBO site for campsites. And it's,
I know.
So I've wanted to kind of interject some science and some Eclipse preparation. So every 3 or 4 days, I'm going to print a few pages from the different chapters and just get people back on Eclipse subjects. I'm tired of reading about campsites.
Yeah,
I know.
Well, thank you.
Well, it's kind of funny. It's a lot of people are just now waking up to, oh, you mean I could probably make some money off of this?
Yeah.
It just really, because my next door neighbors a year ago, because they have a big party house and I'm having all my friends and family over. I asked them if if your guys aren't going to be here for this, can I just rent your house?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Oh, no, we don't know anything." Guess what? They came up today and said, "Yeah, you still want to rent our house?" And I said, "No, now I'm committed."
Yeah, I understand.
So now they're asking me, "So where can we post it to get it?" I'm like, I don't want to introduce you to all the.
Yeah, a little late.
There's some
Somebody
Eclipse,
will do it.
there's some Eclipse sites that are posting stuff like that now.
Yeah. They should try to keep that separately. They really should, but it's hard.
So.
It's hard to police Facebook.
Yeah, it is. I feel for the admins.
Yeah, I do too. And the only thing that we didn't touch on, I'll just mention briefly, is look out for animal behavior changes. The main one, if you're in a natural environment, is the crickets will start going crazy about 10 or 15 minutes before totality. I also remind people, because I've seen this myself, and we saw it in 2019, Chris, if you're getting close to totality within 10 minutes of C2 and you see a group of birds, like 6 or 8 or 10 birds that you haven't seen flying around through all this time, and all of a sudden you see this group of birds up there flying as if they have a purpose, that's a behavior. They're probably trying to fly into their nighttime resting position. So be aware of what the birds are doing in the sky. Listen out for crickets. Those are the two easiest ones. Some of the other ones are, a little more challenging. But those two, I think you'll see.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to be next to some birders.
Yeah.
And so they were directly focused on the bird activity.
Right. Exactly.
And it's always fun to a lot of birders are eclipse chasers.
It's those big binoculars. They have it. They have the equipment already. Let's go.
Yep.
Okay,
well, that was a great time.
That was a great time. And the one thing I want to say, I'm very impressed with your expertise on eclipse photography and eclipse everything. And you've seen how many now?
So 5 totals, and then that one annular. Yeah.
So you've really built up a lot of expertise in a short eclipse time.
Yeah. So, that's a good point. There's certainly people who have been to more eclipses than I have. I kind of have taken the education aspect of it very seriously and really to the next level. But, I tell people, and I think I say it in my book, that it's just an offshoot of my profession. I mean, I'm a plastic surgeon that does complex breast reconstructions. So I am used to teaching complex things to the lay public all the time. I mean, I enjoy that. That's what I do every day, except every day it's in medicine. But eclipse phenomena and eclipse photography is the same thing. You're trying to boil down what seems to be really complex to people to try to understand it for their first time. So it's an extension of what I do every day.
So one of the other things that hit me too is that my nephew right now is doing his residency in California.
Okay.
Soon to be in Orlando.
Yeah.
And he's still going to try to make it to this eclipse. Come by. I'm saving a hotel room for him.
Good.
So you can come to the eclipse, because right now he's in that catch-22 of schooling and work.
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard when you're in medicine to take time off.
Yeah, he's really stressed about it, but he might fly in for the day and fly back out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for your time.
Man, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, right back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right back on, Gordon.
And I'll probably reach out to you and see what you did on the sparkly, how you set up the sparkly thing.
Yeah.
I have to copy you.
I'm going to do that for sure.
That's it for this episode of Totality Talks. Wow, what an information-packed chat. Hope you get a hard copy or take the electronic download in addition to downloading his Solar Eclipse Timer app. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We are getting more downloads than we ever thought we could, and we graciously thank you for your support. In our next episode, we have the head of the American Astronomical Society's Solar Eclipse Task Force, Rick Feinberg. Another fascinating episode awaits. So plan up, gear up, and get ready. Time is running out. Totality awaits. We will be addressing some of the bad information that's swimming around out there. As important as it is to keep your safety glasses on during the partial phases, it's equally as important to take them off during totality. Rest assured it's 100% safe to look at totality. As always, clear skies.